The Color Purple was never just a period drama. It arrived like a cultural shockwave. At a time when Hollywood preferred safe stories, this film stepped straight into subjects most studios avoided: race, gender, abuse, and survival. On screen, audiences saw a painful but powerful story. What they didn't see was the chaos behind the camera. Fierce protests erupted before release. Creative battles divided the production. Actors were pushed to emotional breaking points. And long after the cameras stopped rolling, many of those scars never healed. Today, we're pulling back the curtain. These are the hidden struggles, dangerous risks, and uncomfortable truths behind The Color Purple, including how one legendary performer nearly walked away from the film forever. Let's begin. Number 1. Steven Spielberg almost walked away from the film. Steven Spielberg was not the obvious choice to direct The Color Purple. By the early 1980s, he was famous for Jaws and E.T., not for intimate dramas about systemic racism and generational trauma. When the project was offered to him, Spielberg hesitated. He openly questioned whether he was capable of authentically telling a black woman's story. Privately, he feared his lack of lived experience would become a liability rather than a strength. Warner Brothers saw it differently. The studio wanted Spielberg's name to guarantee box office success, even if it meant controversy. Under pressure, Spielberg agreed, but only on one condition. He insisted on grounding the film heavily in Alice Walker's novel and relying on the cast to guide emotional authenticity. Even so, doubts followed him throughout production. Years later, Spielberg admitted he wasn't brave enough, especially when it came to fully portraying Ceely's sexuality. That hesitation would haunt both the film's legacy and his own reflections on it. What audiences didn't know was that several black directors were considered before the studio insisted on Spielberg. That decision ignited controversy before a single frame was shot and set the tone for every debate that followed. Number 2. Oprah Winfrey won her role through obsession, not opportunity. Before The Color Purple, Oprah Winfrey wasn't a movie star. She was a local talk show host in Chicago. Everything changed the moment she read Alice Walker's novel. The book consumed her. Oprah carried it everywhere, underlining passages, rereading scenes aloud, and emotionally attaching herself to the character of Sophia. When she heard about the film adaptation, she begged for an audition. Casting directors ignored her. Refusing to give up, Oprah tracked down Spielberg's office and left repeated messages. When she finally auditioned, her performance was raw, untrained, and devastatingly real. Spielberg reportedly stopped the audition and told her, "You are Sophia." Oprah drew directly from personal trauma to build the role. But once filming ended, fear set in. She worried the character's rage and physicality would destroy her television career. Instead, it launched her into global fame. What audiences didn't know is that without Oprah's relentless persistence, the film might never have found its most defiant voice. Sophia's power wasn't manufactured, it was fought for. Number 3. Whoopi Goldberg was discovered by the author herself. Whoopi Goldberg was virtually unknown when The Color Purple began casting. She wasn't a conventional Hollywood choice. She wasn't glamorous. She wasn't safe. At the time, Goldberg was performing a one-woman show in San Francisco, delivering raw monologues about race, womanhood, and survival. Alice Walker attended one of those performances and was stunned. Walker immediately contacted Spielberg and insisted that Goldberg audition. When she did, her reading was so emotionally intense that Spielberg reportedly teared up. The decision was instant. Goldberg was Ceely. The role transformed her career overnight, but the cost was enormous. Goldberg later described the shoot as emotionally crushing. To play Ceely, she had to empty herself daily, embodying years of silence, abuse, and erased identity. Other respected actresses were considered, but Goldberg's mix of fragility and strength cut through every alternative. She wasn't performing pain, she was channeling it. What audiences didn't know was how close the film came to choosing a safer, more traditional option, and how much power would have been lost if it had. Number 4. Quincy Jones fought to keep the film alive. The Color Purple nearly died before it ever reached a camera. Quincy Jones read Alice Walker's novel in 1982 and immediately recognized its cinematic power. Hollywood executives didn't. Studio leaders dismissed the story as too risky, too painful, and too centered on black women to succeed commercially. Jones refused to let it disappear. He used his influence to push the project forward when it was quietly being sidelined. More importantly, he personally convinced Steven Spielberg to direct, believing Spielberg's status could protect the film from studio interference. That decision came at a cost. Jones was accused of compromise. Some critics argued he had handed a deeply black story to a white director. Jones responded bluntly. His priority was not ideological purity, it was survival. He believed the story needed to be told, even if the path forward was imperfect. Beyond producing, Jones composed the score, blending African musical textures with sweeping orchestration. The music became the film's emotional spine, carrying grief and resilience where dialogue fell silent. What audiences didn't know is that without Quincy Jones's persistence, The Color Purple might never have existed beyond the page. Number 5. The set became emotionally unbearable. Filming The Color Purple was not a typical production. There was no emotional distance between the actors and the material. Scenes involving abuse, rape, and domination were rehearsed repeatedly until exhaustion set in. Actors later described the environment as emotionally suffocating. Oprah Winfrey admitted she carried Sophia's anger home each night. Whoopi Goldberg often remained silent between takes, afraid that breaking Ceely's emotional state would weaken the performance. Danny Glover, portraying Mr., struggled deeply with the role. He isolated himself on set, weighed down by the cruelty he was required to embody. Spielberg attempted to lighten the atmosphere by playing music between takes, but the heaviness never fully lifted. These performances weren't constructed, they were excavated. The emotional toll was real, and it followed many of the cast long after production ended. What audiences didn't know was that the realism they felt on screen was fueled by genuine emotional suffering behind it. Number 6. Danny Glover paid the price for playing Mr. Danny Glover delivered one of the most disturbing performances of his career as Mr. It was so convincing that many viewers refused to separate the actor from the character. After the film's release, Glover was harassed in public. People shouted insults, spat at him, and accused him of being the man who hurt Ceely. Some even threatened him. Glover later said he repeatedly tried to explain that he was playing a role, but many refused to listen. The hostility followed him into future projects. Privately, Glover questioned whether the role had crossed a line. He admitted feeling guilt, not because the character was fictional, but because the pain felt real to audiences. What few people knew is that Glover had already softened Mr.'s dialogue during production. He believed the original script was too cruel and feared the character would become unbearable. Even with those changes, the damage was done. The performance blurred the line between art and identity, leaving Glover to carry a burden he never expected. Number 7. Alice Walker nearly withdrew her support. When Alice Walker watched the first cut of The Color Purple, she broke down in tears. But those tears were not purely from joy. Walker believed Spielberg had captured the emotional weight of her novel, yet she felt something essential was missing. In particular, she was deeply concerned that Ceely's romantic and emotional bond with Shug had been softened. For Walker, that relationship was central to Ceely's liberation, not a side note. She confronted Spielberg and urged him to restore more of that intimacy. Spielberg resisted, fearing that 1980s audiences and studios were not ready to face it. The tension between author and director became personal and intense. Walker later admitted she briefly considered pulling her support entirely. In the end, she chose compromise. She allowed the film to move forward, even though it did not fully reflect her original vision. What audiences didn't know was that the film nearly lost its creator's blessing, and that the debate over what was erased would follow the movie for decades. Number 8. The film ignited protests before it even premiered. Before The Color Purple reached theaters, it was already under fire. Some black male leaders publicly condemned the film, accusing it of portraying black men as violent and abusive. Organizations debated whether the movie reinforced harmful stereotypes. In several cities, protesters gathered outside early screenings, carrying signs and demanding boycotts. Spielberg faced criticism for directing a black story as a white filmmaker. Others argued the film empowered women's voices in a way cinema rarely had. The divide was sharp, emotional, and deeply personal. The controversy nearly overshadowed the release, but it also fueled curiosity. Audiences wanted to see what had sparked such outrage. What few realized at the time was that the backlash didn't weaken the film, it amplified it. The Color Purple became one of the most discussed and debated movies of its era, not despite the protests, but because of them. Number 9. The cast survived through private rituals. To endure the emotional strain, the cast created their own support system. Oprah Winfrey later revealed that she, Whoopi Goldberg, and Margaret Avery often gathered in private spaces between takes. They prayed, meditated, cried, and talked through the weight of what they were portraying. These moments were not planned. They were necessary. Danny Glover, despite playing the film's most feared character, sometimes joined these gatherings. He apologized for the brutality he had to enact, separating himself from Mr. in moments where the role threatened to consume him. Spielberg respected these rituals and gave the actors space. The press never reported on them. The public never saw them. What audiences didn't know was that the bond forged in those quiet moments lasted decades. In a production defined by pain, these rituals became a form of survival and the reason many of the actors emerged intact. Number 10. Whoopi Goldberg improvised one of the film's most tender scenes. One of the most unforgettable moments in The Color Purple is the shaving scene, quiet, intimate, and unexpectedly gentle. Celie shaves Mr.'s face while softly humming, transforming an act of power into one of care. What audiences didn't know is that much of this scene was improvised. The script outlined the action, but Whoopi Goldberg instinctively added the humming and subtle dialogue. Spielberg recognized the authenticity immediately and let the camera keep rolling. In the editing room, there was debate about trimming the scene, but the filmmakers ultimately fought to preserve it. Goldberg later explained that she drew from childhood memories of watching her grandmother braid hair. That emotional memory shaped the rhythm and tenderness of the moment. The result was a scene that felt lived in rather than performed. In a film filled with brutality, it became a brief, fragile reprieve, proof that survival sometimes expresses itself through quiet acts of compassion. Number 11. Margaret Avery lived as Shug, even when cameras stopped. Margaret Avery did not simply play Shug Avery. She became her. To prepare for the role, Avery stayed in character long after filming ended each day. She wore Shug's gowns at home, spoke in her slow, sultry cadence, and immersed herself in blues music. The transformation was complete and exhausting. Shug was a woman of contradiction, confident yet self-destructive, empowering yet wounded. Embodying those layers took a heavy emotional toll. Avery later admitted she often cried after filming love scenes, terrified they would be cut or mocked. Her dedication paid off. Critics praised her performance as fearless and magnetic, yet awards recognition never came. Avery later described Shug as both her greatest gift and her deepest heartbreak. What audiences didn't know was how much Avery sacrificed emotionally to give Shug depth and how close the character came to being reduced to a stereotype. Number 12. Oprah Winfrey's physical transformation left lasting scars. To portray Sophia, Spielberg wanted Oprah Winfrey to feel physically imposing, a woman whose presence alone could challenge Mr. Oprah committed fully, rapidly gaining weight to embody Sophia's strength and defiance. The transformation worked on screen. Sophia felt immovable, powerful, and unyielding. Off-screen, the cost was severe. After filming ended, Oprah struggled to lose the weight and fell into depression. She later revealed that Sophia's body stayed with her long after the role ended, becoming a catalyst for her lifelong struggles with weight and self-image. The performance launched her film career, but it also left a permanent imprint. The role did not end when the cameras stopped rolling. What audiences didn't know was that Sophia wasn't just a character Oprah played. She became a physical and emotional burden Oprah carried for years. Number 13. Steven Spielberg altered key scenes to protect the cast. Some of the film's darkest moments were intentionally restrained during production. Early drafts of The Color Purple included more graphic depictions of abuse, particularly in scenes involving Mr. As filming progressed, Spielberg became increasingly concerned about the emotional toll those scenes were taking on the cast, especially Whoopi Goldberg, who was new to film and already carrying immense psychological weight. Rather than push further, Spielberg adjusted camera angles, shortened moments of violence, and relied on implication instead of explicit brutality. Silence, posture, and framing replaced physical detail. Danny Glover later said he was relieved by those choices. He believed the cruelty was already present without being shown. Some critics would later accuse Spielberg of softening the story, but others argued that restraint made the film more devastating. What audiences didn't know was that these changes weren't driven solely by censorship or fear of backlash. They were decisions made to protect actors from spiraling into real trauma, proof that sometimes less reveals more. Number 14. 11 Oscar nominations ended in silence. When The Color Purple earned 11 Academy Award nominations, it seemed poised for historic recognition. Best Picture, Best Actress, multiple supporting acting categories. The industry had acknowledged its impact. Then, awards night arrived and the film won nothing. The loss stunned the cast. Oprah Winfrey later described sitting in the audience as category after category passed without their name being called. The silence felt deliberate. Speculation followed. Some believed Hollywood wasn't ready to reward a film centered on Black women's suffering. Others argued the Academy was punishing Spielberg for stepping outside his blockbuster identity. Whatever the reason, the snub became infamous. Public backlash was swift. Critics and audiences called it one of the most shameful oversights in Oscar history. Ironically, the loss deepened the film's cultural weight. What audiences didn't know was how deeply the rejection hurt those involved, many of whom felt their groundbreaking work had been quietly dismissed by the very institution meant to honor it. Number 15. Much of the film was shot chronologically. Most films are shot out of order to save time and money. The Color Purple was not. Spielberg made the risky decision to film many of Seeley's scenes chronologically, allowing Whoopi Goldberg to evolve naturally alongside the character. At the beginning of production, Goldberg's Seeley was withdrawn, hesitant, and nearly voiceless. As filming progressed, that transformation unfolded in real time. By the time they reached the dinner table confrontation, Goldberg wasn't acting empowerment, she had lived through the journey. The approach stretched the schedule and increased costs, placing pressure on the production. What audiences didn't know was how close this decision came to causing budget chaos. But the payoff was undeniable. Seeley's growth feels authentic because, in many ways, it actually was. Number 16. The sister reunion scene was almost cut. The emotional climax of The Color Purple, Seeley, running across the field to reunite with her sister Nettie, nearly didn't survive the edit. In early cuts, Spielberg worried the scene felt too sentimental after such a long, harrowing story. He considered shortening it or minimizing its emotional release. To him, restraint felt safer than indulgence. The cast strongly disagreed. Several actors argued that the reunion was not excess, it was the payoff. After years of silence, separation, and suffering, the audience needed to witness joy without compromise. Oprah Winfrey later said that moment was the reward for everything the characters had endured. Spielberg listened. The full scene was restored. What audiences didn't know was that during filming, the tears were real. The crew reportedly applauded after each take. Without the cast's insistence, the film might have ended on a colder note. Instead, it closed with hard-earned catharsis. Number 17. The film was censored and banned around the world. While The Color Purple sparked debate in the United States, the reaction overseas was even harsher. In South Africa, still under apartheid in 1985, the film was banned outright. Authorities viewed its portrayal of Black resilience and defiance as a threat. In parts of the Middle East, scenes depicting intimacy between Seeley and Shug were cut, labeled immoral by local censors. Even in Europe, television broadcasts frequently removed moments of domestic violence. The story was fragmented, diluted, or erased entirely, depending on where it was shown. Spielberg later reflected that he expected controversy, but not erasure. What audiences didn't know was that the bans only fueled underground demand. Pirated VHS tapes circulated quietly across borders. In some countries, watching The Color Purple became an act of quiet rebellion, proof that the film's power extended far beyond theaters. Number 18. Real divisions behind the scenes shaped the performances. Despite the public image of unity, tensions existed on set. Veteran actors sometimes resented Oprah Winfrey's lack of film experience, while newer performers felt intimidated by established professionals. Danny Glover often isolated himself, partly to maintain Mr.'s emotional distance, partly because the role made connection difficult. Spielberg attempted to foster unity through group dinners and informal gatherings, but cliques formed anyway. Not every fracture healed. What audiences didn't know was that some of those real-life divisions fed directly into the performances. Seeley's isolation felt sharper. Sophia's defiance burned brighter. Mr.'s menace carried an unsettling authenticity. The chemistry on screen wasn't entirely manufactured. Some of it came from unresolved tension, simmering just beneath the surface, another raw layer woven into the film's emotional fabric. Number 19. The novel's ending was nearly rewritten. Alice Walker's novel ends with Seeley finding peace through independence, family, and self-worth, not romance. But that ending was almost changed. Studio executives pushed for a more conventional resolution. They wanted the story to lean harder into Seeley's relationship with Shug, believing audiences needed a romantic payoff. To them, empowerment alone didn't feel marketable. Spielberg resisted. He argued that Celie's true journey was about reclaiming her voice, not being saved by love. Whoopi Goldberg strongly agreed, insisting that Celie's power came from within. After heated discussions, the studio backed down. What audiences didn't know was how close the film came to diluting its message. Had the executives prevailed, The Color Purple might have ended as a softened love story. Instead, it remained a declaration of self-ownership, quiet, radical, and uncompromising. Number 20. The film divided critics but changed lives. When The Color Purple premiered, critical reaction was deeply divided. Some praised it as a masterpiece of emotional storytelling. Others accused Spielberg of sentimentalizing Black suffering. The debate didn't fade. With time, it intensified. Scholars, critics, and filmmakers argued for decades over whether the film was a triumph or a compromise. Yet audiences responded differently. Letters poured in to Whoopi Goldberg and Oprah Winfrey from viewers who saw their own pain reflected on screen. Survivors of abuse, silenced women, and marginalized voices found recognition in Celie's journey. What audiences didn't know was how personal the film became for millions of people. Love it or critique it, The Color Purple refused to disappear. Its endurance proved that some stories matter not because they are perfect, but because they speak to wounds that were never allowed to heal openly. Oprah Winfrey nearly lost the role that defined her. Here's the truth few people ever heard. During early test screenings, studio executives felt Oprah Winfrey's performance as Sophia was too raw, too aggressive, too uncomfortable. Some pushed to reduce her screen time. Others suggested recasting entirely. Spielberg resisted but warned Oprah that the studio was circling. Devastated, Oprah internalized the fear. She checked herself into a weight loss camp, convinced she had ruined her chance. She believed her future in Hollywood was already over. Weeks later, Spielberg called her personally. "They can't take Sophia from you." The role stayed. Oprah received an Academy Award nomination for her very first film. What audiences didn't know was how razor-thin that moment was. Without Spielberg's protection, Oprah Winfrey's career might have ended before it truly began. The Color Purple was not just a film. It was a battlefield of art, race, gender, and emotional survival. It launched careers, scarred others, ignited protests, and reshaped cultural conversations that still haven't settled nearly 4 decades later. The pain behind the camera was real, the cost was lasting, and the truth was never simple. Sometimes, the hardest stories to tell are the ones that change the world. And once you know what happened behind The Color Purple, you'll never watch it the same way again.